Every night you could choose anything to lull you to sleep. A gentle piece of music, the sound of falling rain, or a story told slowly and softly, woven with sacred secrets from thousands of years ago. Whispers once carried by prophets and angels, traces of the Creator left in every star, all written down in ancient books long forgotten, now gently spoken again, so you can sleep and listen. Tonight, you will listen to the story of a name the earth still remembers, a name that drips with sorrow, with shame, and with mystery, not just the first murderer, but the first man to feel what it meant to walk without blessing. This is the entire legacy of Cain. He was the son of a mother who once lived in paradise, the brother of the first shepherd, the first to give God an offering and the first to feel his silence. Cain, the tiller of soil cursed to yield thorns. Cain, the man who knew how to build but not how to forgive. His story did not end with one murder beneath a silent sky. It stretched across generations, into sons and grandsons, into music and metallurgy, into fire and fury. It touched angels, it whispered to the watchers, it grew in the bones of giants, it survived the flood, and it may still survive inside us. This is a story not of death, but of what comes after blood cries out, of wanderers, of men with marks, of cities that should never have been built, of daughters who sang to stars and sons who hammered spears from stolen iron. So now, let your breath fall gently, let your heart beat quiet, let your thoughts become as soft as dust. You do not need to know where Cain went, you only need to follow his shadow, and let the old stories guide you. If these whispers of ancient truths stir your soul, let your heart guide you to join this journey of sacred stories. There are many more to come. Sleep well, seeker of forgotten things. It began with silence, a silence too large for a single family to bear. A silence that came after laughter had touched the fields of Eden's edge. A silence heavy enough to shake the bones of the world. You were there in the dust, watching two brothers grow. One tended the soil, thick and stubborn beneath his fingers. The other walked gently among lambs, calling each by name. They both loved the same sky, but only one would be remembered with peace. Cain was the firstborn. His name meant acquired, as if Eve, still aching from exile, believed she had gained something back from the loss. And maybe in those first days she had. He helped her till the ground, coaxing shoots from cursed soil. He built with stones and dug furrows through the dry dirt. He brought fruit to his mother with joy, and she looked at him the way a mother looks when she remembers a place no longer hers. Abel was different, quieter. He watched rather than built. He sang more than he spoke, and in the folds of his voice the lambs followed. His hands were soft, not stained by clay, but warm with the breath of beasts. Time passed and the two boys became men. And as men do, they turned their hearts toward heaven. They each brought an offering. Cain, the tiller, brought fruits of the field. Abel, the shepherd, brought a lamb, the firstborn, pure and unblemished. The fire came only for Abel. The smoke curled up and kissed the sky. The flames wrapped around the lamb like a whisper of approval, but Cain's altar remained still. His fruit sat untouched. No wind came, no spark, only silence. And in that silence, something dark began to bloom. You have felt it before, that ache when your gift is ignored, that heat in the chest, that weight in the hands when praise goes elsewhere. The Bible says Cain became very angry and his face fell. But those words are too quiet. What really fell was the innocence of man's offering. For the first time, worship turned into comparison, sacrifice into resentment. Cain looked not toward God but sideways at Abel. God spoke then, softly. as he always does before the fall. "Why are you angry?" he asked. "If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." But Cain did not speak. He did not answer the voice that once walked in the garden breeze. Instead, he made a plan. He called Abel one morning. "Come, let us go out to the field." And Abel followed, trusting as brothers do. The field was quiet. The sky is clear. The wind is mild. No thunder warning. No angel blocked the way. And then it happened. The first blood soaked into the soil. The first death was not caused by God but by man. The first time a brother's breath left his body, not from old age or disease, but from hands once shared in play. The earth swallowed it, but I did not forget. God came again. "Where is your brother Abel?" And Cain, still stained with dust and silence, replied, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The question hangs even now in the dark. Am I my brother's keeper? Do I watch over the ones who walk beside me? Do I notice their breath, their tears, their worth? But God knew, and the cry had already risen. "What have you done?" he said, with sorrow more than rage. "Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." It was the first time the ground became a witness. The first time creation itself bore the testimony of murder. The dirt became a scroll, the blood became a psalm of grief. And God became a judge. He did not kill Cain, though some would say he should have. He marked him instead. Cursed would be the ground beneath his feet. A wanderer he would become, a man without a place, a life without roots. But still God placed a mark on him, not to curse but to protect, so that no one who finds him should kill him. Why? Why spare him? Why not end the bloodline then and there? Maybe because mercy is older than judgment. Maybe because God still remembered Cain's first gift. Maybe because even the cursed still carry the image of the divine. Even if that image is cracked, Cain left, east of Eden, away from the garden's gate, away from the place where angels still stood with swords of fire. He walked into a land called Nod, a word that means wandering. And as he walked, the ground whispered of blood, and the stars watched in silence. And the heavens remembered the first brother and the brother who did not keep him. As your breath slows now, as your mind softens, you may wonder, what became of Cain? Did the earth ever yield for him again? Did the mark burn or protect? Did he sleep beneath trees, or did the soil itself reject his rest? And most of all, did he ever weep for what he had done? Let these questions drift with you into the night. Let your thoughts settle like leaves, and follow the footsteps eastward toward the next shadow in the story. It was not the voice of a man, not the scream of one dying, nor the groan of one grieving. It was deeper, lower than sorrow, older than anger. It came not from the throat of Abel, but from the very roots of the world. A voice that rose like a sigh from the soil, a moan from the bones of the earth itself. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. That was what the Creator said. And so the ground became more than dust. It became a memory. It became a witness. It became the first grave, but it did not keep silent. Cain walked away, but the voice beneath him did not stop. With each step it whispered. It whispered not in words, but in aches, in the way his footsteps sank a little too deep. In this way the wind no longer cooled his brow, in the way the animals paused when he passed, uncertain. Cain was not a beast, he was not some demon, he was still a son, still made of breath and clay. But he was also now something else, the first to carry memory like a scar, not in the mind, not on the skin, but in the soil beneath his feet, the mark God placed upon him. We are never told what it looked like, only that it was mercy, a strange, holy boundary drawn by the hand that made all men, a mark not of punishment but protection, so that no one would strike him down in vengeance. Because God knew vengeance multiplied. It grows teeth, it becomes a cycle, and if Cain were killed, the wound would never heal. So Cain wandered, not just away from Eden, but away from home, from blessing, from rootedness, from place. And you know what that means, don't you? You felt it, that ache of disconnection, when nothing feels like yours, when the land does not answer back, when you are surrounded but still alone. He went east, always east, outward, away from the garden's gate, and he found a land called Nod. The name means wandering. It was not a place but a condition, a state of being, a reminder. Cain, the man with a mark, was now also Cain, the man without a home. And yet he did not fade. He did not die in the desert. He did not vanish into myth. He did what men do. He built. He took his curse and turned it into a city. We will speak of that city soon, but before we build, we must sit for a moment. Let your breath soften now. Let your body feel the ground beneath you, the same earth that swallowed Abel's blood. It holds memories. It holds sorrow. It holds the voice of the first wrong, but it also holds you. And in that paradox there is rest. Cain heard the voice beneath the ground every time he planted. He saw it in the way crops grew crooked or not at all. He heard it in the silence between the rain. He felt it in the ache of his arms. He knew the ground remembered. And so he turned from it. He no longer tilled, no longer offered first fruits. The offering had failed. The silence of God had wounded him too deeply, so he built it. He shaped stone. He cleared land. He planted not seeds but walls. He taught his sons to melt metal, to forge blades and instruments, to play songs that shook the heavens, not to please them, but to drown out the voice beneath the ground. You see, Cain was not just a murderer. He was an ancestor. He was a builder, a teak. A founder of cities, and perhaps even a prophet of pain, because something changed in him, not all at once, but slowly as years passed. The blood of Abel did not stop speaking, but neither did the mercy of God, and Cain began to wonder not just what he had done, but what might still be done through him. Some say he fathered giants. Some say he made music that called the stars. Some say his children lit fires that reached the heavens. And some say he never stopped hearing the voice beneath the ground, not because it accused him, but because it reminded him of what had been lost. Have you ever wished for a voice to haunt you just so you would not forget? Not to torment you, but to anchor you, to remind you that you were once loved, once innocent, once whole. Maybe that was Cain's true curse, to remember, because memory can be heavier than wrath. As your eyelids fall slowly now and the breath of the night brushes your skin, remember this. The first blood did not speak of hate. It cried for justice. It sang of wrongness. But in its cry was also the echo of a brother's name. Cain would never forget that name, and neither should we. Abel, breath, vapor. The one who was here, then gone, and yet not fully gone, because the earth remembers. And the voice beneath the ground still whispers beneath your feet. Sleep now. For the story of Cain does not end in exile. It only begins there. The garden faded behind him. It was no longer guarded by trees but by fire. And Cain, the first to be born of dust and womb, the first to build from earth rather than be shaped by it, walked away from that fire. He did not look back. There was nothing left to return to, no gate, no blessing, no voice calling him in the cool of the day, only exile, only distance, only the long hush of being east of Eden. That phrase, east of Eden, has echoed down through the ages. Not just a direction, but a state of soul, a spiritual dislocation, a place not marked by geography but by grief. Have you not also stood there somewhere east of your own peace, carrying the memory of something holy yet no longer able to touch it? Cain walked that place first, and in his wandering he found land dry and wide and nameless. And he gave it a name, Nod, the place of drifting. But Cain was not content with drifting. He had once tried to please God, once offered gifts with open hands, and though the fire never came for his fruits, the longing never left his chest. He did not want to die a wanderer. He did not want to disappear. He wanted to build something that even God could not turn away from. And so he began to build a city. Yes, a city. The first one in all creation, not made by angels, nor by the hands of God, but by the cursed hands of a man. East of Eden, Cain laid the stones. He lifted walls from soil that had rejected him. He taught others to quarry, to stack, to shape. And he named that city not after himself, but after his son, Enoch. The name means initiated, the beginning of something, a passing on, a legacy. Cain, though cursed, chose not to be forgotten. He chose to become a father, to give not death but life. Can you feel the ache in that? A murderer builds a city. A cursed man creates a lineage, and from his blood new names would rise, new stories, new makers of music, metal, and myth. The mark was still on him, but it did not stop him from shaping the world. You may ask, was this defiance, or was this redemption? Did Cain build to spite the God who exiled him? Or did he build to honor the mercy that spared him? Scripture doesn't say, but the stones speak. They always do. Perhaps those walls whispered when the wind passed through their gaps. Perhaps the soil, once soaked in blood, was now pressed under brick. Perhaps Cain, laying the final stone, looked up at the sky and wondered, was this enough? Would God see this city and see him? The land was hard, it did not give easily, but Cain had learned to take it. He planted trees for shade even though they took years. He dug cisterns, built altars, lit fires. Some say his city thrived, some say it fell. Some say it was swallowed by the very earth that once cried out. But one thing is sure, Cain was not erased. He was remembered, even east of Eden. And if you close your eyes now, if you breathe with the rhythm of ancient things, you may feel what he felt. That blend of pain and purpose. That strange truth that even the cursed can create. That beauty can still be carved from sorrow. That cities can rise from the soil that remembers sin. The stars watched. The ground held its breath. And the first city flickered to life under the dark sky, built by the hands of a man with a mark, a man who could not return but who could still go forward. Cain did not speak to God again. At least, no record says he did, but maybe he did not need to. Maybe building was his prayer. Maybe the walls were his confession. And the son he named was his hope that the story might go differently this time. Enoch grew, and from him came others. And from them came the makers of instruments, the singers of lullabies, the hammerers of bronze, the tellers of stories too ancient to trace. Cain faded into legend, but his line did not. And the blood that cried out from the ground, it echoed, not just in grief, but in the songs of his children and their children's children. Perhaps they sang to drown the memory, or perhaps they sang to remember him rightly, not as a monster, but as a man. A man who walked too far, but still built something sacred with what he had left. So sleep now with the walls of that first city around you, not made of stone and wood, but of memory, of mercy, of a mark that did not end a man, but let him begin again. You are east of Eden, but you are not lost. They called it Nod, but Nod was not its true name. It was not a city on a map, nor a land of rivers and mountains. It was something deeper, a condition of the soul, a place shaped by exile. You walk into it every time you feel unseen, every time your prayers echo back unanswered, every time your hands build but your heart wanders. That is Nod. Cain did not stumble into it, he was sent. The Lord said, "You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." And with no one to guide him but guilt, he went east, always east, far from the trees of Eden, far from the altar where fire once fell, far from the place where he once heard God's voice. There in Nod, Cain became the first to live outside the memory of blessing. But Nod did not kill him, it shaped him. He built, he married, he fathered, he taught. And through his hands something unexpected emerged, a culture, not one of reverence but of survival, not one of praise but of permanence. Nod was hard, its ground refused to nourish, its sky offered no whisper, but Cain knew the art of making things yield. He was a tiller of soil once. He knew how to coax life from refusal, so he did not wait for miracles. He forged his own. Have you ever stood in such a place? Where miracles do not come and yet you must move forward, where the silence of God is louder than thunder and still your feet carry you on. That is what Nod teaches. It is not a punishment. It is an invitation to create without applause, to build without affirmation, to continue even when the heavens do not answer. Cain's city rose from this refusal, stone upon stone, wall after wall. He taught his sons to find meaning in matter, to carve beauty from bronze, to name animals not because they were gifts but because naming gave control. This was not Eden. There was no innocence here, but there was intention, and intention has power. The world east of Eden was not quiet, it was restless. Its winds carried stories, its shadows birthed myths. The people of Nod did not walk with God, they walked with memory. And memory is a heavy thing. They remembered a garden they never saw, a tree they could not name, a curse they never caused, but still bore in their bodies. Some say Nod became a place of brilliance, that the first instruments were crafted there, that the stars were charted, that music was born not in joy but in mourning, songs to drown the blood's cry, lullabies for a soul that could not sleep. Others say Nod birthed monsters, giants, men of violence, hearts that knew not love but only survival. And perhaps both are true, because pain births both beauty and destruction. And from Cain's sorrow came both steel and song. In Nod there were no prophets, no angels descending, no fire from heaven, only men marked, remembering and building. And yet God still saw. He watched Cain hammer stone, watched his children name rivers, watched his wife braid her hair in the evenings, tending to a man who bore both wrath and mercy. He did not speak again to Cain, but he did not strike him down either. And in that quiet distance something sacred stirred. Cain's story did not end with murder, it became a mirror of what we become when Eden is behind us but the journey is still long ahead. We all build in Nod, we all plant in dry ground, we all name children in the shadow of regret. We all look back and wonder if there's a way to go forward. Cain did not return to the garden, but he found a way to live outside it. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. As your breath evens out now, as your thoughts drift gently, know this: you are not alone in Nod. Many have walked this path. Mothers, fathers, wanderers, poets, builders. You are surrounded by those who create in the silence, who worship in the wilderness, who find meaning not in fire from heaven but in the slow laying of stone. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Lord still walks among them quietly, watching, waiting, not with anger, but with a mercy too deep for words. Sleep now in this land east of Eden. Let Nod become your resting place tonight, not because it is cursed, but because it is honest. And there is rest in truth. He was born under a sky that no longer opened. No angels sang. No fruit fell freely from trees. No rivers sparkled with the laughter of paradise. But still a child came. And Cain, the man who had been marked by God, looked into the eyes of his newborn son and saw something that startled him. Not punishment, not vengeance, but I promise. He named him Enoch, initiated, dedicated, the beginning of a new way, a name that meant, this child will carry what I could not. And with that name, Cain did something few remember. He built a city. A place of walls and memory, not to be named after himself, but after his son. He called the city Enoch, the man of exile, the one without a home, the one cursed to wander, founded the first city known to man and gave it his child's name. What does it mean to name something sacred after your child? To take your curse and plant your hope inside it. Cain did not name the city salvation or forgiveness or even mercy. He named it after his blood. And in doing so, he made a declaration to the world. My son will not bear my mark. My son will build something I never could. My son will walk where I was cast out. It was not pride. It was longing. Can you feel it? That ache to redeem your name through someone else. To see your shame buried beneath someone else's blessing. Cain could not undo the blood he spilled. He could not unplant the seed of death. But in Enoch he could build something else. So the child grew and the city with him. Stones rose like prayers. Markets echoed with the clatter of bronze. Voices hummed songs beneath a sky that had long been silent. This was no Eden, but it was home. Enoch was not like his father, at least that's what the stories whisper. Where Cain had been restless, Enoch was rooted. Where Cain had been cursed, Enoch seemed watched, not in wrath, but in patience. As if heaven waited to see what this son would become. Some say he walked with the angels. Not this Enoch, but the one who came later from another line who too bore the same name. But perhaps it was not a coincidence. Perhaps the name Enoch, initiated, was always meant for those who lived between worlds, between wrath and redemption, between the fall and the promise. And this first Enoch, son of Cain, was the first to live in that in-between. He did not see Eden. He did not touch Abel's blood. But he bore both stories in his bones, and maybe that's why he built so well. Enoch the man and Enoch the city rose together, one in flesh, one in stone. It is said he fathered Irad, who fathered Mehuel, who fathered Methushael, who fathered Lamech. And the line of Cain stretched forward through iron and fire, through harps and hammers, through men who would shape the world with both violence and brilliance. And it began with him, Enoch. He was not a prophet, not a priest, but he was the first son of a fallen man to live a life not bound by the mark of that fall. He did not carry the curse. He carried the reminder. And that may be harder because reminders echo. They whisper at night. They call through dreams. And every time he walked through the city gates past the stones bearing his name, Enoch knew he was the son of a man who had killed his own brother. And yet he did not flee. He did not hide. He lived and he built. Can you feel the weight of that courage, to live in the shadow of a shame that is not yours and still sing, still plants, still raise children of your own? That is the legacy of Enoch. You may not know the shape of his face. You may not know the sound of his voice. But you know the feeling of carrying what your parents could not undo and still waking up to build. Enoch was not perfect. The line of Cain would one day be known for worse. But in this moment, let us remember the tenderness of a father naming his son, not after his pain, but after his hope. He could have called the city Regret. He could have named it Wanderer's Rest, but he named it Enoch, initiated, a new beginning, a name that whispered, "I may not be able to return to Eden, but my son might reach something just as sacred. Sleep now in the shade of ancient stones. Let the story of Enoch settle over you, like the dust of a city long buried but never forgotten. For in every builder's heart is a Cain who once wandered and an Enoch who dared to plant his name in stone." In the city of Enoch, walls rose not only to protect but to forget, to keep out the wind that once carried the voice of God, to hush the memory of a brother's cry, to drown out the sound of exile still echoing in Cain's chest. But inside those walls another sound began to rise, the ring of metal on stone, the hiss of fire-fed forges, the chant of men shaping earth into weapons. And so was born the first civilization of swords. It did not begin in hatred. It began in fear, fear of beasts, fear of the dark, fear that the Mark of Cain was not enough to protect the sons of Cain. So they made protection with their hands. They took the stones from the same earth that once swallowed Abel's blood, and they sharp. In them they carved handles from the bones of animals. They burned wood until it glowed and melted ore until it flowed like honey. They did not yet know about war, but they were preparing for it. Tubal Cain would one day become their master of fire. But even before him, his fathers learned to bend the world to their will. Can you hear it? The hiss of the forge, the crack of a hammer, the breathless silence before steel meets flesh. It was not the battle they desired, but power. Power to say, "This is mine. This is my land, my flock, my life, and no one will take it from me," because in Nod there was no promise of protection, only the memory of rejection. The Watchers had not yet descended, the giants were not yet born, but already Cain's children had begun to craft their defense against a world they did not trust. Their city grew tall, not beautiful but brutal. Its walls were thick, its gates narrow, its men walked with blades at their hips and fire in their eyes. And yet there was music. Jubal, brother of the smiths, took reeds and strings and turned them into breath and beauty. So within that same city where hammers rang and sparks flew, songs also danced. Songs of mourning, songs of memory, songs for weddings, for births, for burying the old beneath stone and ash. It was a world of paradox, steel and song, blade and breath, lament and laughter. A world not unlike our own, because every civilization carries both. The ache to create and the hunger to conquer. And Cain's line, born from blood, did not deny the latter. They learned to take what they could not earn. They measured strength in volume, in how loud a voice could rise, how many fields one could claim, how sharp a man's shadow fell at noon. And though no scripture says it outright, some say the sons of Cain began to look less toward heaven and more toward dominance. The world was still young, still wide, still holy in places unnamed. But in Enoch, holiness was replaced with legacy, and legacy began to glitter with steel. And yet God watched. He did not destroy it, he did not speak, but he watched. And even silence, when divine, can be heavier than thunder. So the city grew, and its sons grew prouder, and their tools became weapons, and their music became war chants, and their feasts became declarations of power. The fields outside the walls no longer welcomed the barefoot. They belonged to those who bore blades. And thus was born not just a city but a system, the first civilization of swords. You may wonder, did Cain live to see it? Did the man who spilled the first blood live to see blood become an industry? Did he weep when he saw his great-grandsons sharpening blades not to harvest but to claim? We do not know, but we know this: he built the city, and what we build echoes long after we leave. So now, as the fire in the forge cools and the anvil sits quiet beneath the moon, rest your thoughts here, in the hush between strikes, in the lull between legacies, where even the sharpest blade cannot cut silence. Let your breathing slow, your limbs grow heavy. Let the city fade from view. Stone by stone, you do not belong to the sons of Cain, but their story echoes through all civilizations, even yours, for in every hand that builds there lives the temptation to conquer, and in every song there is the chance to remember something holy. Sleep now. The forges have dimmed, the swords rest in their sheaths, and a new chapter waits beyond the walls of fire. He was born with the scent of smoke in his lungs, not the smoke of sacrifice, not the incense that rises gently in holy places, but the harsh, hissing breath of fire fed by bone and coal, the smoke of transformation, the smoke of dominion. His name was Tubal-Cain, forger of bronze and iron, first master of the furnace, grandson of Enoch, great-grandson of Cain. And though the blood of a brother still cried from the ground, Tubal-Cain learned to silence it with flame. He did not farm, he did not hear, he did not sing. He broke a stone, he bent ore, he made earth itself surrender to heat and hammer. And thus began the age of fire makers. His hands were scarred by the embers of invention, his feet blackened by soot. His eyes glowed with the shimmer of molten metal, and with every clang, with every hiss of steam, a new kind of power was born. He did not just make tools, he made boundaries, iron to keep out, bronze to break through, weapons to claim, armor to protect. Before him, men fought with sticks and stones. After him, they fought with crafted death. And yet, not all he made was violent. He shaped plows too. He made tools for digging, for building, for carving the name of Cain's line into the bones of the earth. But the fire did not care what it made. It only burned. Can you feel that? That tension between creation and destruction, between forge and flame, between glory and grief. Tubal-Cain was not a prophet, but he was something sacred, a maker. And making in a world still groaning un. Dare the weight of the fall was a kind of miracle. He did not see Eden, but perhaps in the glow of his furnace he imagined a light that could rival the flaming sword of the cherubim. He did not speak to God, but in the roar of the fire he heard a language all his own. Some say he was feared, others say he was revered, and perhaps the two are not so different, because those who wield flame are always watched carefully. His sister was Nama, a name that means pleasantness. Some say she taught the use of color and sound, that while Tubal-Cain mastered the fire, she mastered the voice. Together they shaped a culture, one that no longer wept for Eden but lit torches to light the way forward. They were the generation of brilliance, of industry, of steel and song, but brilliance untethered from reverence soon forgets the sound of holy things. And so the fire makers rose. Their forges lined the city walls. Smoke crowned the skyline. Hammers rang in rhythm, a symphony of sparks. And from these fires emerged blades with no names, axes with no purpose but power, shields for wars not yet begun. Did Tubal-Cain know what he was shaping? Did he dream of rivers of blood flowing from swords born in his fire? Or did he simply love the heat, the thrill of mastery, the feel of cold iron bending beneath his will? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps he was not a villain, just a mirror. Of all men who create and then wonder what their creations become, you too have held fire. Not in your hands, but in your heart, the fire of anger, of invention, of grief, of desire. You have wanted to make something burn, to be seen, to be remembered. That is what Tubal-Cain desired, not death, not war, legacy. And in fire he found it. He became the father of the forge, the patron saint of metal, the man whose name would be whispered in every workshop long after the city of Enoch crumbled to dust. And yet beneath it all, beneath the sparks and soot and shouting, the ground still remembered. The blood still cried out. The mark of Cain still shimmered, faint but unforgotten. For no amount of iron can bury the sound of innocence lost. Sleep now. Let the fire dim, let the furnace rest. You have walked beside the first of the smiths. You have seen what flame can create and what it can destroy. And soon you will meet the others, those who played music in the midst of this steel-laced world. And those who drew blood again. The sons of Cain did not just make, they sang and they struck. And you will hear their stories, but for now close your eyes. The fire is quiet, the hammer is still, and the earth waits for the next story to rise from ash. While Tubal-Cain bent the will of earth and fire, another son of Cain walked a gentler path. His hands did not blister from the forge. His feet did not trample ore. Instead, they danced among reeds and strings, listening for melodies hidden in the bones of the world. His name was Jubal, and he was called the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe, the first musician, the one who made the wind sing, the one who took silence and turned it into song. And in a city of stone and iron, his notes were softer than a mother's breath, yet louder than the hammers that rang through Nod. Jubal did not fight, he did not rule, but he was remembered. Because he gave the people something Cain could never give: beauty. Can you hear it? The tremble of a string beneath a gentle touch, the whisper of carved reed calling to the dusk, the rhythm of a heartbeat set to sound, the first lullabies, the first hymns, the first songs sung by those who had never known Eden but longed for it anyway. His music did not erase the pain, but it wrapped it in sound. It gave form to ache. It gave language to loss. In Jubal's hands, grief became melody. The mothers of Nod, who rocked their children to sleep with eyes still heavy from exile, sang his songs in the night. The fathers who bore the weight of hard labor found solace in his gentle harmonies, and even the beasts paused to listen. It is said that when Jubal played, the wind leaned in, the trees hushed their rustling, and the stars blinked a little slower, not because he had power, but because he had longing. Longing sings louder than strength. You know this too, don't you? You've heard it in the songs that make you cry without knowing why, in the hum that finds you in the quiet hour, in the memory of a voice that once sang to you when you were too young to speak. That is Jubal's legacy. He was not a warrior, not a builder of walls. He did not command. He did not defend. But he opened a door between the seen and unseen, between what was lost and what could still be remembered through song. His lyre was carved from wood that once grew freely before the curse. His pipes were shaped from river reeds, bent but not broken. And with these he told the story of a world still aching. He sang of Abel not by name, but in the minor tones of mourning. He sang of Cain not in judgment, but in the dissonance of longing. He sang of Enoch, the city, the boy, the name. And through his song, the children of Cain remembered not only what they had lost, but what they still had, the breath in their lungs, the beat in their chest, the night sky above, endless listening. It is said that Jubal's music softened even Tubal-Cain, that sometimes when the forge grew too hot, his brother would step outside, sit on a stone and listen, not to worship, but to rest. Because music even then was not entertainment, it was medicine. The people of Nod did not have temples. But when Jubal played, the city became holy. The same stones that bore the echo of blood now echoed with rhythm and harmony. And so the city of Cain became the cradle of both violence and beauty, steel and song, blade and breath. From Cain came a legacy not of one thing but of many, not just destruction, but also the desperate, sacred act of creating something soft in a world that had grown so hard. You too are a descendant of Jubal, not by blood but by spirit. When you hum to yourself in the dark, when you tap your foot without reason, when a tune enters your soul and won't leave, you are remembering him, not the man, but the impulse to sing, to speak the unspeakable, to make something beautiful in the middle of sorrow. Sleep now. Let his melody hold you. No longer do you walk alone through Nod. You walk in a city of sound. Let your breath find the rhythm of the lyre. Let your heartbeat become the drum. Let your dreams begin to sing. Jubal still plays. Somewhere beyond this world, in that sacred silence where sorrow becomes song. Then Lamech was the one who made it echo. He stood at the end of a long line. Cain begot Enoch. Enoch begot Irad. Irad begot Mehuel. Mehuel begot Methushael. And Methushael begot Lamech. A man of many names but one shadow. The shadow of the mark, the shadow of the curse, the shadow of the first murder still clinging to the soul of the seventh son. Lamech was not like Jubal. He did not play instruments. And he was not like Tubal-Cain, though he bore his name. He was something else, a man of power, a man of pride, a man who looked into the dark and found no fear there. He had 2 wives, Adah and Zillah. They bore him children, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. But it is not for his children that we remember him. It is for his words, his song, a strange and terrible song. It is the oldest poem in the Bible. The first verse written by human hands, spoken not to God but to women. Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's vengeance is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. What kind of man sings a murder? What kind of man turns vengeance into poetry? Lamech did not plead. He did not hide. He did not fall silent in shame like Cain. He boasted. He lifted the memory of blood and held it like a banner in the sun. If Cain killed in jealousy, Lamech killed in pride, and something shifted. This was no longer one man's curse. It had become a culture. The mark had turned inward. The wound had become a weapon. Vengeance was now a virtue. Lamech was not content to be marked. He wanted to be feared. He raised his voice like a prophet, but his God was violence. And yet there is no record of punishment, no voice from heaven, no curse pronounced. Only silence, and perhaps that silence speaks louder than any word. Because God had already marked Cain, already warned. I already watched the line unfold. And now, generations later, violence was no longer a shock, it was an inheritance. Do you see? This is how the fall grows, not in leaps, but in songs, not in monstrous acts. But there are subtle changes to how we speak about wrong. When murder becomes verse, when vengeance becomes rhythm, when violence becomes tradition, then the garden is truly forgotten. But the earth does not forget. The ground, once soaked by Abel's blood, I still listen, I still remember. And perhaps it trembled when Lamech spoke, not because of what he did, but because of what would come. For from Lamech's line, giants would one day rise, men of renown, men of ruin, but that story waits. Tonight we sit with this, the weight of lineage, the way one sin becomes a system, the way one broken heart can echo for generations. Lamech sang of 77-fold vengeance. But Yeshua, Jesus, son of Mary, would one day speak of 77-fold forgiveness. A reversal, a healing, a whisper to undo the roar, but that too is far ahead. Now we walk through Nod, through fire and flute, through pride and poetry. through a city where the first man died at his brother's hand and another man sang of doing the same. And we wonder, what do we do with such a story? Do we forget it? Do we condemn it? Do we bury it beneath modern thoughts, or do we hold it like a mirror? Because sometimes we are lamech, we carry pride like a banner, we speak harshly, we in our anger, we name our vengeance justice, and we do not even see it. And sometimes we are Ada and Zillah, forced to listen, forced to carry the grief of another man's boast. The wives do not speak in the story, but perhaps their silence is the loudest thing of all. So sleep now, but sleep listening, listening to the echoes of Cain, listening to the fire of Tubal Cain, listening to the melodies of Jubal, and now the boast of Lamech. The city of Enoch is no longer innocent. Its children are no longer dreamers. They are builders of blades, singers of sorrows, makers of myths, but the blood still whispers, and the ground still listens. Sleep. You have walked through the house of Cain, and soon you will see what they built beyond the city walls, for Cain's legacy is not yet finished. A curse, when carried long enough, becomes custom. What once stung becomes familiar. What once grieved becomes a ritual. And in the land of Nod, the Mark of Cain was no longer just a sentence. It became a way of life, the Cainite way, a path not chosen in innocence but in inheritance, a rhythm passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, not always in word but in the silent gestures of survival. You could see it in their eyes, alert, watchful, never at rest. You could hear it in the cadence of their speech, measured, never soft, always ready to justify. You could feel it in the walls they built, thick, high, without windows. They were not wicked, they were wounded. And from that wound a culture was born. It was a culture of brilliance, yes. Music, metals, poetry, cities carved from the bones of the hills. But beneath the beauty, beneath the song, was fearful. Fear of weakness, fear of being forgotten. Fear that if they did not build fast enough, strong enough, loud enough, they would disappear into the silence that once greeted Cain's altar. So they filled that silence with invention. They were the first to name the stars, not to worship them but to measure their distance. They studied the seasons, not to honor them but to master them. Even time became something to conquer. The Cainite way was not cruelty for its own sake. It was controlled. Because when you carry a curse, you learn to carve your own blessing, even if it costs you your soul. And they did carve. Their cities stretched outward. The children of Cain did not just dwell in Enoch. They moved, spread, sought new lands to tame, new peoples to teach or conquer. And with every outpost, every tower, every song, the curse of Cain was reshaped into something that looked like civilization. But no garden bloomed there. No fruit fell from trees, only sweat, only sparks, only the steady march of men trying to rewrite a story written in blood. You see, Cain's children did not want Eden. They wanted legacy. They knew they could never walk again in the garden. So they built their own paradise, stone by stone, note by note, law by law. But paradise made by men always forgets something. It forgets how to rest. It forgets how to forgive. And so the Cainite way became a culture of ceaseless motion, never still, never soft, never truly home. Their names grew long. Their stories grew louder. But their hearts beat like Cain's. Is there still a place for me in the world? Will God speak again? Will someone find me and strike me down? And so they kept building, keep crafting. I kept singing, but none of it quieted the ground. It is still remembered, it still spoke in its silence, in its dryness, in the way crops would sometimes fail even when every step had been followed. And maybe that was mercy too, because sometimes a little failure is the only way to stop a curse from becoming a crown. You walk in this world still. You see the echoes of Cain everywhere, in the skyscrapers reaching upward but never homeward, in the music that screams instead of sings, in the hands that shape but do not heal. But you also see Jubal, you hear Nama, you feel Enoch, the parts of Cain's legacy that tried desperately to make something good from the broken. And so tonight, as you lie down, as your breath slows, know this: you do not have to walk the Cainite way. You are not bound to repeat what was passed down. You can sing softer, you can build slower, you can forgive what was never yours to carry. Even Cain was shown mercy. Even the cursed I can rest. Sleep now, let the city's noise fade. Let the songs fall quiet. Let the fire die down. You are not forgotten, and the curse, it does not define you. Not anymore. They are barely named. Their voices do not thunder. They do not shape bronze or sing the world awake, but without them the city would never have stood. Without them the sons of Cain would not have walked the earth. Without them the silence would have been unbearable. They were Adah and Zillah, the wives of Lamech, daughters of Nod, mothers of Jubal, Jabal, Tubal Cain, and Nama, women who lived beneath a shadow they did not choose. Their names mean ornament and shade, softness, shelter, something the Cainite world had nearly forgotten, and still they endured. You will not hear them in the hammers, you will not see them in the altars, you will not trace their names on the city gates, but they were there, in the pauses, in the breath between verses, in the lullabies whispered when no one else would sing. They were the ones who wept. When the sons were born, when the songs turned into war chants, when Lamech raised his voice to proclaim that he had killed a man for wounding him, they were there. And though the scrolls are silent, the earth remembers. Do you know what it feels like to live beside someone great and terrifying? To share your tent with a man who calls himself 7 times more deadly than Cain? To carry children inside you, knowing their names will be carved into history, but yours will be left in the dust? That was Adah's breath. That was Zillah's silence. And yet they stayed, not from weakness, but from strength that was never celebrated. They fed the builders, they comforted the musicians. They kissed the brow of the smith, blackened by fire, and saw not his danger but his hunger to be more than what the world expected. They taught Nama how to weave beauty even when the world broke. They sat in doorways, kneading grain, watching stars, remembering stories that men no longer told. Stories of a garden, of a woman who once walked with lions, of a serpent who lied, of a child lost. Maybe they sang of Eve. Maybe they whispered to one another, what curse are we passing down, and how do we hold it gently? Because the curse was not just for Cain. It rippled through every womb, every hearth, every quiet night when the city finally slept and a mother wept alone. They wept for what could have been, for sons who bore fire in their hands, for husbands who turned pain into pride, for a God who once walked with man but now I only watched from afar. And still they sang. Not loud, not public, but to their children, soft songs, womb songs, the kind you don't remember but which live inside your bones. You too were shaped by women who wept, even if you never saw it, even if they never said it. There is a sorrow carried in silence that echoes louder than war drums. Adah and Zillah were not warriors, they were anchors. They stayed when others fled. They made homes from dust. They stitched fabric over bruises. They braided hair in the glow of forges. They whispered prayers to a sky that hadn't spoken in generations. And when Lamech raised his voice, they did not speak. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew some songs should not be answered. Instead, they wept. And the earth, still trembling from Abel's blood, drank in their tears. You may not know their faces, but you know their ache. every time you carry a burden not your own, every time you choose gentleness in a world of blades, every time you tend to life, even when others tend to die, you are walking in their footsteps. They are the mothers of culture, of legacy, of resistance, not loud but lasting. Let your breath slow now. Let your heart rest beside theirs. You are not alone in the night. You are cradled by generations of women who made peace in lands built by violence. Sleep with Adah's hands smoothing your brow. Sleep beneath Zillah's shade. They are still here, still watching, still weeping, but not without hope. The city did not sleep, not really. Even when the stars blinked low, even when the flutes of Jubal fell silent, there was always a spark, a hiss, a hammer. Fire does not rest. And in the house of Cain, neither did his sons. From Tubal-Cain, the art of forging spread like a flame through dry reeds. Each generation inherited more than tools, they inherited a spirit. One that refused the wilderness. One that feared stillness. One that believed survival meant shaping the world before it shaped you. The sons of Cain became the fire bearers. Not just smiths of bronze, but smiths of identity. They melted the earth, carved the hills, dug deep into stone not to hide but to control. Have you ever seen a child hold fire for the first time? The awe, the power, the sudden belief that everything can be made to obey. That was the Cainite lineage. Generation by generation, they bent the world under iron's hiss. With every tool they shaped, they believed they were rewriting their curse. That if they could name enough metals, cut enough stones, forge enough weapons, they could outrun the stain left in their father's wake. But curses are not outrun, they are inherited. And sometimes they are mistaken for culture. So the fire did not just shape blades, it shaped hearts. Harder, sharper, less inclined to question, more inclined to conquer. The children of Nod became known not only for what they made, but how they made it, fast, fearless, and without pause. They taught their craft to strangers, to other tribes beyond the city's reach. And soon, iron spread farther than Cain had ever. Walked, they were praised, envied, fears, but never healed. Because what they passed down was not just fire, it was grief wrapped in greatness. Invention laced with insecurity. They did not know God's face, only his silence. And in that silence they made cities, towers, altars of iron, not to worship but to prove their worth. Even their stories changed. The tale of Cain, the murder, the mark, became softer, sanitized, justified. He was provoked, some would say. He was misunderstood. He protected his birthright. Abel was favored unfairly. The offering was flawed. And thus the sin became a story. The story became a song. The song became a proverb, and the proverb became a truth. In time, the blood of Abel was not mourned. It was a myth, a stepping stone to something greater. And the mark of Cain, it became a badge, proof that the divine had noticed him, set him apart, marked him not for shame, but for legacy. Such is the danger of forgetting. Even brilliance left unblessed will burn too long, and so generations passed. And with them came men and women whose names are now forgotten, but whose fires still burn. They shaped shields with family crests, carved laws into stone, counted time by the forging of new tools, taught children how to make before they learned how to mourn. And maybe there was something good about it. The Cainite hands healed wounds, built bridges, fed cities. Not all iron was used to kill. But the echo of the curse remained, a thrum in the background, a voice under the forge, a whisper in the blood. Your brother's blood cries out to me still, always, forever. But in the noise of industry, few still listened. And so the fire raged on, You've seen it, haven't you? The way we carry what we do not name. The way our brilliance hides our sorrow. The way we teach our children to strive but forget to teach them to sit and weep and wonder. This is the legacy of generations of fire and iron. Not evil, but weary, so weary. Because to build without pause is to forget what we are building toward. So rest now, lay down your tools, let the forge cool, let the embers fade. You do not need to prove your worth, you do not need to outrun the silence. The fire served its purpose, now let it rest. You are not Cain, you are not the hammer, you are the child who remembers. And remembering softly, honestly, is the beginning of healing. Sleep now, child of breath and dust. The iron has cooled. The curse has spoken, but it does not define the dream. The city of Enoch had grown tall. Its towers pierced the sky. Its fires glowed like stars upon the earth. Its people brilliant, bold, burdened, forgot what it meant to live in the garden's shadow. But heaven had not forgotten. And not all eyes looking down were human. There were others, beings of light. Spirits once clothed in radiance, now restless in the heavens. They were the watchers sent to observe, to record, to whisper to creation from the edge of divine restraint. But as they watched, they felt something stir. Desire, not for power, not for dominion, but for the daughters of men, the daughters of Cain. They were not born of Eden, but of exile. Not named in scripture, but in star song and memory. They walked with iron in their hands and sorrow in their eyes, and the watchers saw them. Not as the world saw them, as daughters of a cursed line, but as flame walkers, as fireborn, as beautiful. It began with gazes, from mountain to plain, from sky to city. And the longer they looked, the more the watchers forgot their charge. They did not envy the sons of Cain with their weapons and cities, but they yearned for their daughters. For in the fire of Cain's legacy, something had been forged that even heaven could not resist. The women were fierce, not innocent, but radiant. They braided iron into their hair. They walked through markets speaking riddles. They carried sorrow like perfume. And their lullabies, those lullabies carried more memory than the scriptures of stone. They did not know they were being watched. They did not ask to be seen. But their presence pulled the divine downward. Have you ever felt watched by something not quite human? Felt eyes on your soul when no one stood near? That was the feeling in Nod before the descent. It is said that 200 watchers made a pact on Mount Hermon. They would leave their place. They would cross the veil. They would take wives from among the daughters of Cain. And they swore it together, not in defiance but in devotion. Their leader was Semjaza, a name that once meant he who sees the name. He saw more than he should. And he wanted what was never meant to be touched. The daughters of Cain were flattered, curious, perhaps even afraid. But these beings, they came not as monsters, but as luminous ones, tall, gentle, wreathed in power, and they offered secrets. They taught charms, herbs, healing, hidden words, and in return they took women for themselves. They built houses on high places. They whispered strange names over the womb. They loved in ways the world had not yet seen. And from these unions came the giants, the Nephilim, born of heaven and earth, born of flame and flesh, born of desire that crossed boundaries even angels were told never to cross. The daughters of Cain, they bore these children with pain, not like mortal pain, but groaning of the earth kind, rivers trembling, trees bending, skies darkening. And yet they sang to them, they named them, they tried to love them. Because even the forbidden is still born of the womb. Some of the women were destroyed in birth. Others grew old watching their sons grow too tall, too fast, too hungry. The Nephilim did not just walk, they shook the ground. They drank whole streams. They hunted beasts that had no fear of men. And yet they remembered lullabies. Some say they wept in the night. Some say they dreamed of stars they could not reach. Some say they whispered to the moon, asking what they were and why they felt so alone. Because no one told them, not the watchers, not their mothers, not the world. They were not part of the curse, and they were not part of the blessing. They were in between, just like the daughters who bore them. You may feel the weight of that even now, because some stories are not just ancient, they are echoes. You have been watched. You have crossed lines for love. You have carried burdens born of longing and wondered if the fire inside you came from heaven or from the fall. Rest now. Let the story unfold slowly. The watchers have descended, the veil has been pierced, and the daughters of Cain, forgotten by Scripture but remembered by heaven, have awakened something that cannot be undone. Sleep and listen, for giants now walk the land and their dreams still tremble in the deep. They were not demons, not yet. They were angels, watchers, assigned not to rule but to observe, to see without touching, to carry heaven's silence into a world still finding its breath. But desire crept in. It always begins as a whisper, barely louder than wind through tall grass, a glance that lingers, a longing that presses gently until it becomes unbearable. And the watchers, they were weary of watching. They looked down upon the daughters of men not with scorn but with ache, not because they were wicked but because they were wondrous. They glowed not with celestial light but with human fire. They moved with purpose, braided sorrow into their hair, sang lullabies even when the earth groaned. They built altars with calloused hands, their laughter carried grief. Their eyes shimmered with questions, and the watchers who had once sung the stars into place could not look away. Among them one rose, Semjaza. He was not the highest, not the holiest, but he was the boldest. He gathered them 200 in all and said, "Let us descend. Let us take wives among the daughters of men. Let us teach them what we know. Let us make our home not in light but in flesh." And the others hesitated. They knew the law, they remembered the warnings. They had seen the smoke of the first offering and heard the groan of the first death. But desire, it softens memory, it cloaks wisdom in fire, so they made a pact, together, on the slopes of Mount Hermon, each bound to the other. If one fell, all would fall. If one took a wife, none would be left to accuse. They descended like whispers, not storms, not war, just light falling gently into the cities of Cain. They came bearing secrets, names not spoken in any tongue, symbols that opened gates, herbs that soothed or stung. They taught enchantments, potions, metals, weapons, the reading of stars and the power of mirrors, and the people, they received them with wonder. They called them sons of the sky, heaven's gifts, gods, but they were not gods. They were watchers who had forgotten how to wait. Their love was real, twisted but not false. They lay with the women and called them brides. They raised children with hands that had once shaped galaxies. But creation made in defiance carries a different weight. The children born of these unions, the Nephilim, grew into giants, tall beyond reason, hungry beyond control, wise in ways they did not understand, and the watchers they changed. Heaven's light dimmed in them. Their wings, once clothed in radiance, grew heavy with earth. They taught more than they should, secrets that bent the world, words that opened wounds, rituals that summoned spirits never meant to cross the veil. And the earth groaned again. You see, the watchers did not mean to ruin the world. They only wanted to touch it. But touch, when it violates the sacred boundary, becomes corruption. It is written that their sin rose like smoke, a stench before the throne of the Most High. And heaven did not stay silent forever. The angels who had not fallen looked down with sorrow, with fury. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, names like swords in the sky. And the Most High said, "Bind them, bury the seal them in the valleys of the earth. And their children they shall perish in the flood." But that part has not come yet. For now the watchers still walk, half light, half shadow. Their love turned into grief, their knowledge a poison, their longing a lament. And you know that longing too. You've wanted what you were told to only watch. You've ached for something forbidden, not because it was evil, but because it was beautiful, because it made the silence bearable. But even beauty must bow to holiness. Even love must know its place. Sleep softly now. Let your heart rest from its watching. The watchers have fallen, their wings are dust. Their voices are bound, but their story still sings through the ruins. Let the wind carry their names no longer. Let only the stars remember. They were born of longing, not of war, not of wrath, but of union that should never have been. The Nephilim, the giants, the mighty ones of old, not monsters at first. They came into the world as children do, crying, clinging, hungry not just for milk but for meaning. Their mothers sang to them, tried to cradle limbs that outgrew swaddling cloths in days, tried to feed mouths that never stopped aching, tried to teach them kindness even as their hands crushed whatever they touched. Their fathers, the fallen watchers, taught them the ways of heaven, how to speak to the stars, how to bend nature with a word, how to shape wind and silence storms. But something was missing. A soul shaped by rebellion carries the echo of heaven's sorrow. And the Nephilim, they wept, not at first, but slowly as the world began to fear them. They were too tall to bless, too strong to comfort, too powerful to be held. The cities marveled, then trembled. Walls once meant to protect now barely reached their knees. Markets fell silent when their shadows passed. Flocks scattered at the sound of their breath. They were kings before they knew what ruling meant, and they ruled poorly. It began with accidents, a broken wall, a shattered limb, a beast crushed in play. But soon the hunger grew. No field could feed them, no stream could slake their thirst. They took what they needed, then what they wanted, and what they wanted was more. Have you ever known someone born into the world too fast, too large, too gifted, and watched as the world turned their blessing into isolation? That was the Nephilim. Their minds were sharp. Their strength is unmatched. Their charm is intoxicating. And yet they could not sleep, could not dream. For they were born between two worlds but accepted by neither. Heaven mourned their existence. Earth feared it. Even the stars dimmed slightly as if to say this was not meant to be. Their names grew long. Their reputations became legend. They built temples for themselves, mountains of stone shaped by hands as wide as doorways. And they demanded worship, not because they were evil, but because they were lonely. Their mothers aged, their fathers were bound, their brothers could not match them. And so they raised themselves as gods, the first tyrants, the first devourers, the first to forget what it meant to be small. But even giants hear whispers. The earth began to shake, the wind turned cold, the animals grew quiet. And somewhere deep in the bones of the world, a voice began to rise, not in anger, in grief. Because these were children, yes, children of rebellion, children of broken law, but children nonetheless. And judgment would not come in rage, it would flood, but not yet. For now they roamed. Their feet cracked valleys, their laughter bent forests. Their eyes saw too much and still understood too little. And the daughters of men, they wept again. Some bore more giants, some were taken by force, some tried to raise the Nephilim in the ways of peace, and some vanished, swallowed by the very children they loved, because the hunger, it did not stop, Not for food, not for touch, not for power. It was a hunger born of incompletion, a hole that no crown could fill. No city could satisfy me, no blood could quench. And so they kept moving, keep growing, keep ruling, and the world cried beneath their feet. You may wonder, were they evil or were they abandoned? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps they were mirrors of what happens when power arrives before wisdom, when glory comes without grace. Sleep now. You walk among giants only in dreams. They do not roam your streets, but they live in your myths. And myths, like memories, do not die. Rest your heart. You are not too tall to bless. You are not too great to be held. Let the ground be soft beneath you. Let the sky be gentle above. The giants still walk in memory, but here in the night you may walk without fear. Long before the giants roared, before the watchers fell, before the altars burned with wrath, there was music. It began in the hands of Jubal, son of Lamech, descendant of Cain. He made flutes from reeds, lyres from bone and sinew, and coaxed from them the world's fire. RSD hymns, but now the world had changed. Giants walked. The watchers were hidden in shame. Mothers wept for children who were too tall to cradle, too hungry to hold. And the hymns of Jubal returned, not to celebrate, but to mourn. This was not the music of paradise. This was the music of remembrance. It echoed through the streets of Enoch, through the ruins of fallen towers, through the hollows of caves where survivors whispered of brighter days. Jubal's instruments were taken up once more. But their songs had changed. No longer lullabies, no longer love songs. They became laments, hymns of blood, hymns of vengeance. Hymns that asked questions the stars could no longer answer. Why was the curse not lifted? Why did the watchers descend? Why were the children born so wide, so wild, so wounded? Why did heaven look away? These were not songs to be sung aloud. They were hummed in the dark. They were played while fires dimmed. They were remembered when voices grew hoarse from screaming. You see, in every civilization, music is not just entertainment. It is a memory. It is mourning. And the Cainites, for all their brilliance, had much to mourn, so they sang, softly, sharply. Some melodies wept, others screamed. Fathers who had once forged blades now forged songs for the sons they lost. Mothers plucked strings with fingers calloused from survival, singing to daughters who bore giants and disappeared beneath them. And still Jubal's name endured. His hymn book was not written in parchment, but in generations, in the shadows, in breaths caught between sobs, and the giants, even they remembered. Some say the Nephilim in their loneliness began to sing. Low, slow, echoes of the lullabies their mothers once whispered before they feared them, and the sound of those giant voices carried across valleys, not in wrath, but it aches. Have you ever heard a song that made your bones tremble, not because of volume, but because of sorrow? That was the hymn of Jubal, revisited by his descendants and distorted by the children of heaven and earth. It was a music that asked, "Where is God now?" And the silence after each note was its only answer. But even silence carries weight. Even absence has sound. And so they kept singing, not to be heard, but to remember. Jubal's legacy was not in harmony, it was in honesty. In knowing that even when the world burns, even when the flood clouds gather, even when giants roam, a song still has power, not to change the sky, but to keep the soul from forgetting that it once danced in the light. You too have sung those hymns, when no one listened. When grief clung to your chest, when joy felt distant and wrong, your breath became music, your silence became a rhythm, your sorrow became sacred. And so tonight, as you drift between thought and dream, know this: the hymns of Jubal were not lost. They became the heartbeat of those who refused to let the fire define them. Let your soul hum quietly. Let your memory soften. Let the song rise not to be heard but to be felt. Sleep now. The flutes rest on stone. The lyres hang by the fire. The hymns linger in the air like dust catching moonlight. And in that stillness you are safe. They say there was once a harp carved from the roots of the oldest tree in Nod. Its frame was soaked in river clay, its strings pulled from the tendons of a lion killed not by sword but by song. They say when it played, the sky paused, and when it cried, the heavens wept. It was not made by Jubal, it was made after him. By one of his descendants, a woman whose name is now forgotten but whose song still echoes in the valleys where giants once walked. She was called the Storm Wife, not because she summoned rain but because wherever she sang the clouds came running. She did not marry a king. She did not build a city. She wandered from place to place carrying that harp slung across her back like a prophet carries the word. And when she played, the wind changed. Not a wind of peace, but of reckoning. The harp did not soothe. It stirred. Its notes did not calm the restless. They woke them, because there comes a time when mourning must become a movement, when a song must rise beyond sadness, when music must break something to make something whole again. Her harp was not for lullabies. It was for judgment. And yet, it was not cruel. She sang for the mothers who died giving birth to giants. She sang for the trees torn down to build thrones of bone. She sang for the women taken by watchers, for the men silenced by power, for the children too afraid to dream. And the sky listened. The clouds gathered. The wind twisted itself into knots, and the rain came, not a drizzle, not a whisper, but a deluge. It poured over the cities of Cain. It washed over the towers of the proud. It fell like memory on the iron altars that had long forgotten the taste of blood. And as the people ran for shelter, the storm wife played on. She stood on hills, harp in hand, hair tangled with leaves, and she sang of vengeance. Not hers, not man's, but God's, because even in Nod, even in the land east of Eden, there were whispers of a reckoning to come, a flood, a purging, a reset not of time but of memory, and her harp was the thunder before the storm. Some feared her, called her cursed, said her voice turned rivers black, but others followed. They walked behind her, barefoot and silent, learning the melodies that made the sky move. And though her name is lost, her song remains. Buried in the bones of the earth, carved into stone, echoing in the thunder when the storm comes too suddenly and the clouds weep without warning. You see, vengeance has many forms. Sometimes it's a sword, sometimes it's a flood, and sometimes it's a harp in the hands of a woman who refused to let grief fall silent. The harp that called storms did not destroy the world. It reminded me of it, of blood, of silence, of the line that was crossed when angels descended and giants forgot how to weep. Let your breath slow, let your heart quiet. You do not carry a harp, but you carry memories, and memory is a storm all its own. You are not the storm wife, but you are her listener. And as you sleep, may her song pass over you gently. May the rain that falls be cleansing, not crushing. May the storm come not to drown you, but to carry you to stiller waters. Sleep now. The harp has been set down. The storm has passed, and peace for a moment returns. Before war had banners, before kings sat on thrones, before steel was sung into sword, there was music. Not for peace, not for joy, but for fire. The first war music was not written, it felt. It was the cry of a woman whose child was taken, the howl of a man who saw his brother struck down. It was the beat of fists on stone and the rise of voices that had forgotten how to mourn softly. This music was not made to soothe, it was made to summon. And it began in Nod, in the cities of Cain, where grief had fermented into fury. They say it started with a drum, not shaped with care but stretched in desperation. Goat skin over a hollow tree, struck not with crafted tools but with bone. It pulsed like a second heart. Thud, thud, thud. A rhythm older than language, a sound meant to awaken something dormant and dangerous. And the giants, they heard it and they danced, not with grace but with power. Their feet cracked the earth, their breath became a chorus. Their arms swung like winds across fields. They did not dance for joy, they danced for dominance, and the music followed them. Flutes joined, but their tone was shrill. Lutes wept with strings too tight. Voices rose in chant, not melody but mantra. Kill, take, claim. It was the sound of blood, of vengeance rehearsed, of history unhealed. This was the first war music, and it spread through cities, through forests, through tribes who had once sung only of harvest and hearth. Now their songs sharpened. They carved flutes from the bones of beasts. They drummed with rage instead of rhythm. They marched to the sound of their own aching, because music moves the body. And when the body is wounded, it moves with wrath. Have you ever felt that rhythm? The one that stirs something primal even when you try to resist. That is the song Cain's descendants left behind. A cadence that calls the hands to clench, the teeth to bare, the feet to stomp. It is not evil. It is ancient, but without healing it becomes hunger, and that hunger found form. Battles rose not from words but from drums. War was no longer an accident, it was choreography, a ritual, a parade of blades and noise, and still they sang. Some say the watchers taught it. Others say the Nephilim invented it, but most agree it began in sorrow. The sorrow of rejection, the sorrow of silence, the sorrow of being marked, and now it had a beat. Even the sky took notice. Storms began to come in rhythm. Winds shifted with the pace of war cries. The earth itself trembled in tempo, and somewhere beneath it all the blood of Abel still whispered, not in song, not to shout, just a breath. This is not what I died for, but no one heard, or perhaps no one wanted to. Because war music is louder than memory, louder than reason, louder than love, and it marched on from city to city. Brother against brother, giant against man, angel blood against dust. This was the rhythm of the end, and yet no one paused, because once the drum starts, the silence becomes unbearable. You see, they were not monsters. They were men with wounds who forgot how to weep, and so they sang instead with blades. Let your heart settle now. You have heard the war drums. Perhaps not in battle, but in the beat of your own fear, the rush of your own anger, the hum of vengeance beneath your skin, but you are not bound to it. There is music older still, one breath of stillness, of grace. You do not have to dance with giants. You do not have to march with drums. You can sleep. Let the rhythm soften. Let the chant fade. The first war music has ended. For the night, and peace, however brief, may now begin, the sky broke open. The fountains of the deep surged upward, and the music stopped. Rain that had never fallen before fell in sheets too heavy for breath. The ground, once cursed for Cain's sake, now opened its mouth again, not to drink blood but to swallow the world. The flood had come, not a storm, not a season, but a reckoning. The giants fell. The watchers were bound. The cities of iron and blood drowned beneath waters cold and clean and final. And for a moment there was silence, as if the earth had wept all it could and now simply rested under the weight of what it had seen. But not all was lost, because not all of Cain's legacy had died. Some say it should have, that the line of the marked man should have ended in the flood, That Noah, the chosen one, was pure, untainted by the seed of exile. But the world is never so simple. You see, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and through them the world would begin again. But hidden in their wives, in their eyes, in their stories passed quietly from grandmother to child, was the ember of Cain's fire. Noah's ark was not only a vessel of salvation, it was a vessel of memory, and memory never dies. Perhaps it was Ham's wife, a woman descended from the cities of Enoch, bearing the songs of Jubal in her sleep. Perhaps it was Japheth's child, born with a face too knowing, a heart too hungry for power. Or perhaps it was just time itself, unwilling to forget what Cain had begun. The flood washed the land, but it did not wash the soul. And from the mud, as the ark rested on Ararat, new seeds were sown, and among them familiar roots. Men built again, they forged, they sang, they named cities, they raised towers to the sky, they spoke of vengeance, of pride, of greatness. And the blood of Cain stirred again beneath their skin, because legacy is not always evil, it is just unfinished. Cain's mark had not been removed, only scattered, hidden among tongues, buried beneath generations. And though God had made the flood to cleanse the earth, he had not forgotten mercy. Cain had been spared once, not because he was righteous, but because he was human. And perhaps that same strange mercy followed his children into the ark. You may wonder, why would God allow the line to live? Why let the builders rise again? The warriors, the dreamers, the fire makers. Perhaps because he still hoped they would remember how to sing without swords. Perhaps because love does not erase, it transforms. And maybe the curse was never meant to be the end of the story. Maybe it was meant to awaken us to our need for return. The line that did not die carries within it both terror and tenderness. It is the story of every soul who has fallen and yet still wakes up to build again. You have that line in you. Not by blood, but by heart. You've built things out of fear, out of fire, out of hunger to matter, and still you've sung, you've wept. You've remembered what it feels like to be east of Eden but still walking. Sleep now. Let the flood recede, let the waters fall, let the raven fly and the dove return. You are not marked for wrath, you are remembered in mercy. And the legacy of Cain, broken, blessed, still breathing, lives not as a curse but as a question. What will you do with what you've been given? When the waters finally withdrew and the ark groaned to stillness upon the mountains of Ararat, the world exhaled. But not everything had drowned. Not everything that stepped into that ark was seen. The beasts walked in 2 by 2, the lion with his mate, the dove with her sigh. But there were shadows too, not spirits, not demons, but memories wearing flesh. They had survived not in defiance, but in silence. Noah righteous, his sons chosen, but their blood was not empty. Their wives came from lands where Cain's cities once stood. And blood remembers what books forget. They brought with them stories, names, dreams their mothers had, dreams of fire that did not burn, of cities that glowed red in the night. One woman whispered in her sleep in a tongue older than Babel. Another kept charms carved from river stone beneath her garments. Not magic, but memory. And memory survives floods. They were not evil, but they had seen too much to be innocent. They had heard the watchers teach. They had watched the giants bleed. They had danced in temples where the moon was called by a different name. And though they loved their husbands, they did not forget the smoke-filled prayers of their mothers' houses. So when the ark's door opened and the new world began to breathe again, those women walked out carrying more than children. They carried shadows, not curses, not plagues, but remnants of a song that the flood could not drown. Their sons built cities. Their daughters married princes. And the whispers began again. Small at first, just songs around fires, a story here, a ritual there, but seeds do not shout, they sleep. And they spread, the dark S. Survivors were not monsters, they were midwives of memory. And memory, once planted, does not die. It grows beneath the soil of the soul until the right season. So came Nimrod, so rose Babel. So did men begin to defy the skies again, not with war but with architecture. Stone stacked on stone to reach where angels fell from. The ark had landed, but the flood had not changed everything. Because the darkness that survived was not in the giants, it was in grief, in pride, in longing. Cain's bloodline had drowned, but his ache had not. It was carried by women who remembered, by lullabies sung in ancient cadence, by fire tended with hands that once lit altars in forbidden groves. They were not wicked, they were broken, and broken things leak. Sometimes the truth, sometimes sorrow, sometimes legacies. Even Noah, righteous and weary, I felt it. He drank of the vine, he fell into the shadows. And in that moment, as he lay uncovered, naked before the world and before God, it was as though the weight of all that survived crashed upon him. He knew. The ark had carried beasts, souls, seeds, and stains, but God did not curse them again. There would be no second flood, no second drowning, because the story was shifting. Now the darkness would not be defeated by water, but by covenant, by a rainbow in the sky, by law written on tablets, by prophets and mercy and long roads home. But still the dark survivors walked among us. You have met them, you may be one, not by blood but by burden. You carry things the world says it should have been washed away. Angers, hungers, wounds. You build new lives, but something old still sings in you on quiet nights. That does not make you cursed, it makes you human. Because even the ark, hand-built by the chosen, could not stop the river of remembrance from flowing on. Sleep now. You are not alone in your remembering. You are not cast out. The flood is behind you. The land is green again. But the shadows that stepped off the ark, they did not come to destroy, they came to witness. To pass down stories so we would never forget what came before the rain. And you, soft-breathing sleeper, you are the latest page in that long scroll. Let your heart rest. The ark has landed, the storm has passed. But the story, I still walk. There were songs that died in the flood, songs of iron and vengeance, of broken bones and sharpened pride. But there were others, quieter, older, buried deep in the soil of the soul, that did not die. They slept. And when the ark came to rest and the sky turned from gray to blue, the earth exhaled. Then the songs began to stir, not sung with tongue but with a hand. Not played with flutes, but with fire. Not danced in courts, but in fields where the dew still wept for the dead. The children of the ark, with bare feet and wide eyes, walked into a world without memory, but not without music. Because music is older than language, and the earth remembers what we forget. They picked up stones and tapped them, not to call giants, but to mimic the rain. They hollowed reeds to whistle, not to summon war, but to echo the dove's return. Their mothers watched, and for a moment they did not stop them. They remembered songs too, but not all of them were dark. There had once been lullabies in Enoch. There had been wedding chants in the city of tents. There had been prayer hymns sung beneath stars before sin found its voice. Not all that Cain built was cursed. And now, from the soil soaked in judgment, gentler songs began to rise. The earth hummed again. It hummed in the bees as they circled the first blossoms. It hummed in the wind as it moved through olive trees. It hummed in the breath of the first lamb born in the new world. This music did not rise in temples. It rose in gardens, in fire pits, in the stories fathers told without fear in their eyes, because even if the blood of the old ones remained, their bitterness did not need to. Cain had raised cities, but his sons and their sons and the shadows of their legacy, they too could raise something else. Altars, maybe, homes. Fences that kept not enemies out, but the wind from disturbing seeds. And where there are seeds, there are songs. The first harps after the flood were not made by Jubal's hand. They were made by boys with calloused fingers and sorrow in their mother's eyes. They did not sing of war. They sang of water, of the sky, of the mystery of mountains that once were covered but now stood tall again. They sang of the animals, of the raven that did not return, of the dove that did. They sang in silence. And how holy it had become. It was not the music of power. It was the music of survival. And in that music, something sacred returned. You see, the story of Cain is not just one of murder. It is the story of what we do after exile, after wandering, after the flood. Do we rebuild Babel, or do we rebuild the breath? The earth, though wounded, remained willing. It opened its arms to the descendants of both the just and the marked. It grew wheat for Noah and wine for his weakness. It offered fig and olive to hands still trembling from too much remembering. And as those hands played again, not with tools of iron but with strings of hope, the ground listened and forgave. Because the ground knows what we forget, that death does not always mean the end, and that every ending is the ground's invitation to begin again. So the songs returned, softly, slowly, as whispers in children's dreams, as hums in the throats of tired mothers, as chants beside fire when stars blinked back into view. The songs did not forget the flood, but they did not drown in it. They rose with the mountains, with the smoke of sacrifice, with the prayers of people who still bore the memory of loss and still chose to sing. You too carry those songs. They are not written in any book. They are older than that, older than Cain, older than the flood. They are in your breath when you grieve, in your footsteps when you forgive, in your silence when you choose not to answer anger with stone. These are the songs that return to the earth, and in your sleep you return to them. They do not need melody, only memory, only mercy. So close your eyes, let the songs find you, let the earth cradle you. You are not Cain, you are not the flood. You are the music that remained. Sleep. The world has remembered how to sing again. Even after the garden was closed and the flaming sword swung between man and paradise, he watched. Even after Cain turned his back on Abel's grave and walked away from Eden's eastern shadow, he watched. Not as a warden watches prisoners, not as a king watches traitors, but as a parent watches a child who does not yet know what breaking truly means. God watched Cain. He had every right to turn away, to erase the murderer with a breath, to crumble his bones into dust and let silence take root where sin had first bled. But he didn't. Instead, he marked him. Not with punishment, but with preservation. A sign burned into being, not so that men would kill Cain, but so that they wouldn't. Not vengeance, protection. Because even the fallen still fell into the reach of God's mercy. The mark, we never learn what it looked like. Was it on his face, his hand? Was it seen by animals or only by men? Was it physical or was it sorrow itself, etched into his voice, into the way he walked, into the way his eyes never stayed long on anything green? We do not know. Because what mattered was not the mark but the watcher. God still saw him, still followed him through dry places, still waited at the edge of Cain's sleepless dreams, still mourned what could have been, because what is mercy if not grief with arms? Cain's story is soaked in consequence, yes, but it is also bathed in something deeper: presence. The presence of a God who did not revoke breath even when blood had been spilled. The presence of a God who still called, even when the answer came from a grave. The presence of a God who lets justice run its course but plants mercy at every bend of the road. Cain did not die that day because God would not let him. Even in exile, Cain carried something sacred, not innocence but image, still made in God's likeness, still worthy of not being extinguished. We forget that. We turn Cain into a monster, but monsters are made by men, not by God. And Cain, even in his ruin, was never cast into hell. He walked the earth. He built. He fathered. He watched. And somewhere behind the veil, God watched him too. Imagine it. Cain planting seed in soil that once drank his brother's blood. Cain hearing the laughter of his firstborn and remembering the last cry of Abel. Cain growing old but not forgotten. And above him, in silence, the one who still watched did not blink. Perhaps it was not torment that haunted Cain, but grace. The unrelenting, gentle, terrible weight of still being seen by a God who refused to give up on him. Because if mercy can follow Cain, mercy can follow anyone, even you, even now. Perhaps that is why this story was written, not to tell of a crime, but to whisper of a God who follows even the guilty through shadowed lands, not an excuse, but to redeem. Because this is not just the tale of the first murder, it is the tale of the first mercy extended after it, a mercy that said, "You will not be killed, you will live." That's a strange kind of punishment. To be forced to live with what you've done but not alone, to be watched, not with suspicion but with sorrow, not with wrath but with a hope that maybe one day you'll look up and see that the eyes watching you have not changed, that they are still the same eyes that watched you in Eden, that still calls your name, that still wait for the return of what was lost. Cain never returned, but others would, others bearing similar burdens, other wanderers, other murderers, other sons of Adam who thought they were beyond forgiveness, and every one of them was followed by the same God. You too, in your long end. Ites in your quiet mistakes are not unseen. He still watches, not with anger but with aching love. Sleep now. You are not forgotten, not erased, not cast out of his gaze. Even Cain, after everything, was marked not to die but to endure. And if God would watch him, he will watch you. Sleep under that mercy. Breathe beneath that gaze. It does not burn, it is a blessing. The mark was never explained, only given. A moment passed between the judgment and the mercy, and in that moment the silence of God became a shield. We imagine marks as curses, signs of shame, symbols of guilt engraved in flesh, but this mark, this was something else. It was not punishment, it was protection. For Cain had said, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Anyone who finds me will kill me." And what did God do? He listened. The one who had spoken galaxies now answered the cry of a murderer trembling before him. He didn't laugh, didn't say, "You deserve it," didn't strike Cain down. He answered fear with a sign of grace, a mark, a mystery. It was mercy etched into skin or soul or breath itself. We do not know where it lay, but we know what it did. It made vengeance illegal. Sevenfold, he said. Anyone who harmed Cain would suffer 7 times more. It was not justice. It was divine interruption. A hand halting the spiral of violence before it became a prophecy. Because if Cain's blood begets more blood, the world drowns in red long before the flood. But the mark stopped it. Not by force, but by fear. It made Cain untouchable. And in that untouchability, a sacred truth lay hidden. God does not only mark the innocent. Sometimes he marks the guilty so they might live long enough to see what redemption feels like. Cain was not healed by the mark. He was held back from death by it. That's not the same. But it's the first thread in a long tapestry of mercy that would stretch from Eden to Calvary, from exile to return. Because the blood of Abel cried out from the ground, yes, but the voice of God cried louder still, and his voice did not cry for revenge, it cried for restraint, for a world where sin might be named but not echoed, where blood might be remembered but not multiplied. The mark was a mercy because it stood between Cain and extinction. Even more, it stood between the world and Cain's curse. It was as if God said, I know who you are, and I know what you've done, and I will not let it end here. The mark was mercy because it spoke of a God who doesn't need to forget in order to forgive, a God who can hold memory and mercy in the same hand, a God who lets consequences remain but let condemnation pass. Cain walked with that mark all his life. He built it. He raised sons with it. He watched nations form around him, knowing that none could strike him without facing the wrath of the heavens. Was it a weight? Yes, but it was not chains. It was a mirror, a whisper, a reminder you are still seen, you are still guarded, you are still wanted by the one who made you. The mark said to the world, do not touch this one, he belongs to me. Not because he was good, not because he had changed, but because he was still loved. We are not used to that kind of love. We're used to earning, to deserving, to transaction. But this mark was grace without merit, protection without payment. It did not undo Abel's death, but it stopped the dying from continuing, because the mark was not only for Cain, it was for all who watched, all who would have stoned him, all who would have pointed fingers and thrown rocks and made their vengeance feel holy. The mark said, no more. It was not the end of wrath, but it was the beginning of mercy. And it foreshadowed 1,000 other mercies, marks upon doorposts, blood over altars, ribbons of crimson grace tied around the guilty until guilt gave way to peace. Even you bear marks, not the ones men can see, but the one in heaven does. The breath still in your lungs, that's a mercy. The silence between your mistakes and their judgment, that's a mercy. The dreams that come even after you've broken things you can't repair, that's a mercy too. God still marks his own, not to shame them, but to shield them. You walk like Cain did in lands you don't deserve to stand on. You build homes in valleys where others remember your sins. And yet you are not consumed, because the one who marked Cain still marks those he chooses to spare. Not all marks are curses. Some are sacred. Sleep now with that thought, that even Cain was not outside the reach of a hand that still writes mercy into the flesh of wanderers. You are not forgotten. You are not hunted. You are marked, and it is grace. The road ahead of Cain was dry, not barren of life, but barren of innocence. He was not chased by men, but by memory. And though no sword struck him, he bled from within. Every path he walked crunched beneath the feet of regret. But even there in the wild lands, in the east of Eden, in Nod, in the place of wandering, the eyes of God still followed him, not to haunt, but to hold, because the mark was not just on him. The mark was upon the eyes that watched. God never looked away, not when Cain left, not when he built it, not when he wept beside a stream and whispered his brother's name to trees that could not answer. The eyes that once looked upon the void and called forth stars were now fixed on a son who had forgotten how to return. And even that was mercy. Cain walked the rest of his life beneath that gaze. A gaze that was not soft but not cruel. A gaze that remembered Eden, remembered Abel, remembered the dust from which both brothers had come. a gaze that saw the wound and chose not to strike again. The world began to grow around Cain. From his bloodline would come cities, instruments, makers of tents, forgers of bronze and iron, poets of the first civilizations. Civilization was not born in the house of Abel. It was born in the shadow of Cain, and still God watched. Not because Cain had escaped, but because God had chosen not to leave. The eyes that watched the fall, I still watched the wanderer, and they wept. Because what parent does not grieve a child who builds without healing, a son who creates but never confesses, a man who becomes a father while forgetting how to be a brother? Cain carried the mark, but he never laid it down. He was not punished with death. He was sentenced to a life watched by mercy. Do you know what that feels like? To be followed not by vengeance, but by the constant, terrible tenderness of being remembered. To be seen not for what you became, but for what you still are. To be watched not as a criminal, but as a child who still bears some sliver of the image now cracked but not lost. Cain may not have heard God again. Scripture does not say, but silence is not absent. And the eyes of God do not close. He watched Cain plant vineyards, raise children, sing lullabies to infants who would never know their uncle's name. He watched Cain sit alone some nights, staring at the stars, wondering if the ground would one day cry out against him again. He watched Cain grow old and the world grows large. And even as other names came, other sins, other cities and towers, even when the flood would one day come to wash the earth clean, God remembered the mark, because mercy does not expire. You too are watched, not with suspicion, not with wrath, but with longing. You may not have heard him in years. You may think your sin cut the line, burned the bridge, sealed the veil. But the eyes that watched Cain still look across the wilderness for sons and daughters who forgot how to come home, and they do not blink. You are not invisible. You are not discarded. You are not beneath his reach. Even Cain was followed by God. Even Cain was remembered when the world forgot. Even Cain was not forgotten, and neither are you. Sleep now. There are eyes upon you. But not the kind that judges, the kind that weep, that wait, that whisper ancient mercies into your restless soul. You do not need to run anymore. He has already marked you, not for punishment, but in return. And the road is long, but not without company, because the one who made Eden never left the earth. He still walks its shadows, still watches its wanderers, still sees its cities of exile, and still believes that mercy is never wasted. Sleep beneath those eyes. You are seen. You are held. You are remembered. Abel's grave was never sealed with stone. It was not dug by hand, nor blessed by priests, nor marked with a name carved in wood. It was the ground itself that opened its mouth and drank the blood of the innocent. And it will never be forgotten. The earth remembers what we bury and what we fail to bury. The wind forgets. The trees renew, but the soil, it holds everything. Cain may have turned away, but the blood remained. It had no voice, and yet it cried. It had no tongue, and yet it spoke. It had no breath, and yet it screamed, and the heavens heard it. This blood, God said, cries out to me from the ground. Not to men, not to the stars, but to him. Abel's grave became a voice, an altar made of earth soaked not in sacrifice but in sin. And from that day on the soil of the world was no longer silent. It knew sorrow, it knew injustice, it knew the pulse of guilt beating beneath its dust. The ground had been cursed once when Adam fell. But now it carried more than curse. Now it carries history, a witness, a memory, a silent scroll written in red, and every time feet stepped upon it, the ground knew. Every garden tilled, every city built, every field reaped for harvest, the earth remembered what it had swallowed. It did not seek vengeance. It did not seek justice. It is simply remembered. That is what Abel left behind, not a child, not a legacy of kings or tools or tents, but a cry. A voice in the dust that would echo through prophets, poets, psalmists, and finally, through another son whose blood would also cry from the ground. But we are not there yet. Phi. We must sit with this grave, this patch of cursed earth where a brother's body was folded into silence. Did his mother come looking for him? Did Eve weep over dirt still red and damp with blood? Did Adam walk that field and remember the moment he first named the sheep, when all was peaceful and no blood had yet darkened the grass? Did the family speak his name after that? Or did they bury more than a body? Did they bury a memory too painful to keep? No one sings songs for Abel. No line of kings descends from him. No scrolls trace their wisdom back to his hands, and yet he speaks still. That is the mystery, the holy wound, because God does not forget what man forgets. He does not silence what man silences. What Abel lost in life, God preserved in eternity. His death became a warning, yes, but also a witness, that even one breath of injustice echoes forever, that even one act of violence makes the soil we walk upon ache with memory, and that in the divine order of things nothing pure is ever fully erased. Abel's blood is in the ground, but so is his voice, and that voice is a psalm, a question, a wound in the soil that never closed. Even the ground beneath you now it knows. It may not scream, it may not burn, but it remembers every tear and every blow and every silence where justice should have stood. This is not to fright, but to awaken. You walk on sacred ground, always, because the grave of Abel was never just in one place. It is beneath every injustice, every forgotten name, every lost child, every slain prophet, every broken woman, every vanished slave. The ground remembers, and heaven listens. One day another voice will cry out from the ground. A voice that will not condemn like Abel's, but will forgive. A blood that will speak a better word. But tonight you are meant to hear this word first. The word of mourning, the word of the first death, the word of the brother who never saw a child, who never built a city, but who still speaks louder than those who did. Sleep now. You walk upon soil that remembers, so let your soul remember too. Let the voice of Abel sing its sad lullaby, not to curse you, but to remind you that even the silenced are not lost, even the buried are not voiceless. Even the dead still cry out to God, and he hears. There is a sound in the dust. You may not hear it with ears, but your bones recognize it. Your soul flinches, though you cannot name why. And your dreams sometimes tremble with echoes older than memory. It is not thunder. It is not a voice. It is the weight of blood asking to be seen. The sound began in Eden's shadow on the morning after the murder, when the first sun rose and touched the place where the soil had swallowed Abel. It is the sound of grief that has no song, of loss that has no language, of pain too early to have poetry. It is not loud, but it never fades, because the ground holds more than minerals. It carries memory. You walk upon layers of silence, strata of sorrow. Each footstep presses upon forgotten tragedies that the earth still carries like sacred scrolls. Even now, beneath cities of glass and towers of steel, beneath gardens, roads, and graveyards, the dust remembers. It remembers Cain's hands. It remembers Abel's breath. It remembers the first lie and the silence that followed it. And the sound in the dust is not just Abel's blood. It is all blood, all tears, all wounds. The earth is not a neutral witness. It has been weeping since the first exile. And every righteous man who fell, every woman who disappeared, every child whose name was never spoken again, their memory lingers in the sound beneath us. But this sound is not vengeance. It is longing, the longing of the innocent to be known, to be restored, to be remembered by more than dirt and sky. When prophets wandered the wilderness, they heard the sound. When Job sat in ash, he heard it too. When blood cried out from the killing fields, from slavery's chains, from the edge of spears and the mouths of fire, this sound was never far. It is the sound of the dust asking, will anyone listen? Will anyone remember the ones who were taken? Will anyone name the unnamed and mourn what the world has chosen to forget? The sound is low, but the soul hears it. And sometimes in our sleep, our hearts begin to ache for things we cannot name. That ache is the echo of Abel, the echo of all who came after him, because his was the first grave but not the last. And though the dust grows deep, it never grows deaf, it still listens. And if you sit long enough in silence with your hand pressed against the earth, you may feel it. The hum of holy sorrow, the heartbeat of memory. The ache of justice is still waiting to bloom. Even the prophets did not always understand it. They wept without reason. They sang laments for people they never met. Because the sound in the dust is a song older than the stars. It is not a hymn. It is not a psalm. It is a cry. And God hears it. He always has. He heard it when Abel's blood touched the earth. He heard it when Rachel wept for her children. He heard it when the martyrs fell, when the poor were silenced, when the forgotten were cast into ditches. He heard it because he listens to what men forget. The sound in the dust is not lost to him, and this too is sacred. God does not silence the sorrow. He holds it. He writes it into the story. He lets it shape history. He lets it shape you. Because when you hear it, when you finally stop and feel it, you become different. Not loud, not proud, but I'm awake. You begin to see the world not as noise and speed and conquest, but as something holy and cracked, something needing mending. And the dust beneath your feet is no longer just dirt. It is a memory. It is painful. It has potential. That sound is calling to you, not to despair, but to remember, to live gently, to speak carefully, to walk as if every step touches a story that came before you, because it does, and the blood that cried from the ground is still crying, not because it is weak, but because it is waiting, waiting to be heard, waiting to be answered, waiting for someone to say, I have not forgotten you. I have not stepped over your name. I will walk differently now. This is what the sound in the dust asks of us. Not guilt, but attention. No shame, but reverence. And when you lie down tonight, the soil beneath your home, beneath your body, is still singing softly. Let your sleep be holy. Let it be deep. Because even in your dreams, you are held by a world that remembers. And the one who formed you from dust, he hears it too, and he will not forget. The blood cried, the earth remembered, but heaven did not forget either. For every cry there is a reply. It may not come quickly, it may not come loudly, but it is promised. The voice of Abel's blood cried for justice, but another voice was promised. One that would speak not vengeance, but mercy. A better word, a softer cry, not from a wound, but from a well that never runs dry. In the days of the prophets, this voice was only a shadow. It moved through dreams. It flickered in the flames of sacrifices. It whispered through the torn veil of heaven, but never yet walked the earth. Until one day, another son would come. A son who was not born of violence, but would walk straight into it. He would be called a second Abel by the mystics, a new Adam by the scribes, and the Word himself by the heavens. He too would be innocent. He too would be slain by brothers. He too would bleed upon the ground, but his blood would not cry like Abel's. His blood would not accuse. His blood would not rise up and say, "Look what they have done to me." Instead, his blood would say, "Forgive them. They know not what they do. I will remember their names." This is the voice that will one day answer the ache in the dust, not with a sword but with a promise, not with wrath but with resurrection, not with fire but with mercy. You see, the grave that opened for Abel never truly closed, and all graves after it have spoken its name, but the final word will not belong to bloodshed. It will belong to the one who walked out of the grave. He will answer every cry. He will gather every lost name. He will lift every bone from the silence of soil. He will dry every tear the ground ever drank, and he will speak. And his voice will make the earth new, because it was not enough for the ground to remember. It was not enough for the blood to cry. A Redeemer had to come who could speak louder than grief and softer than pain. One who knew the dust not only as a place of burial but as the very substance of his creation. He formed a man from it, and he would one day lie in it. But he would also rise from it, so that the curse of Cain could be undone not through violence but through divine gentleness. And so the legacy of Cain, though stained with blood, was not the end. It was only the first page in a scroll of longing, a story of justice that would one day be met by mercy. Even Cain, marked by guilt and curse, was not erased. He lived, he built, he wandered. And though we do not know what his final breath said, we know that the one who hears blood also hears broken men. Even the cursed may be heard. Even the murderer may be met with mercy. For the blood of the second son is not like the first. It does not cry out from the ground with rage. It cries out from eternity with grace. And that voice still speaks. Tonight, as you sleep, let that voice meet you, not as judgment, but as peace. Let it reach into the ache in your chest you cannot name. Let it whisper to the part of you that has long buried your wounds beneath years of silence. Let it say, "You are not forgotten. You are not your bloodline. You are not your shame. You are not what you buried. There is a voice stronger than blood, stronger than death, stronger than the grave. It is the voice of the one who descended to the dust and then rose so that no blood would cry foe. Revere so that even Abel could rest, so that even Cain could be mourned, so that every voice in the soil would one day rise into song. And so we end this chapter not in sorrow, but in sacred expectation. The blood still cries, but a voice is coming. And one day soon it will answer. We are all children of the dust, but not just Adam's dust, Cain's too. We do not walk this world clean. We walk it marked, though not always visibly. Something of Cain lives in every man. Something of Abel too. But tonight we speak of what was passed to us from the older brother who chose flame instead of tears. Cain did not die, and because of that his legacy was not buried. It was carried forward not in bloodlines but in hands, hands that build cities, hands that strike, hands that plant and hands that bury, hands that burn. Cain was the first to hold fire, not the sacred fire of heaven, but the fire was born of anger. The kind that smolders even when no wind feeds it. It is that fire we carry generation after generation, a fire that can either warm or destroy. Cain was not just a murderer, he was a builder, a wanderer, a father. He named a city after his son. The world we live in is shaped in part by his inheritance, the tools he made, the choices he taught, the silence he normalized. This is the paradox we inherit. The line of Cain is not just violence, it is civilization. And this should unsettle us, because even as we condemn his first act, we benefit from what comes after. We live in cities, we harvest from the ground, we speak in languages born from his wandering. His fire is in our hands, and so the question is not, are we Cain, but rather, what do we do with what he gave us? The fire can become rage, but it can also become light. The wandering can become exile, but it can also become a pilgrimage. The mark he bore, though born of guilt, was also a shield, a strange mercy. Even in punishment, Cain was protected. And this too we have inherited, a God who does not abandon even the fallen. The divine is not afraid of stained hands. He meets them, and sometimes he still builds with them. Cain's fire can forge weapons, but it can also melt chains. It can be destroyed, but it can also purify. It depends on what feeds the flame. Is it jealousy or justice? Is it grief or grace? The inheritance of Cain is not a curse we must repeat. It is a warning, a mirror, and perhaps a doorway. Because the story could have ended in one death, but it didn't. It became the long arc of mankind, a path that leads through deserts, through wars, through empires, through mercy. It was never just about a murder. It was about what we become after the silence. It was about how we build again after the earth has swallowed blood. About how we walk on even when our hands shake from what we have done. Cain's fire in our hands can be used to ignite cruelty or to warm the wounded. And every day we choose. We may not build altars, but we still offer. We still compare. We still fear. We still look at our brother's joy and ask, why not mine? And sometimes in the quiet of our shame, we reach for the flame again. But tonight, let us pause. Let us remember that the mark upon Cain's brow was not the end of the story. Let us remember that even after the ground cried out, God spoke mercy. Let us remember that the fire in our hands is not evil by nature. It is power, and power is always trust. We can use it to build cities that remembers the sky. We can use it to shape words that heal, not hurt. We can write poems instead of curses. We can raise children instead of monuments to pride. Cain built, so must we, but let our building be different. Let it be slow. Let it be sacred. Let it be full of windows where light may pass through, because we are not only his children, we are also the children of the God who wept when Abel fell. And if we hold that truth close, the fire may yet become something holy. Not to destroy, but to illuminate the path back home. Thank you. We now continue with the penultimate section of this sacred documentary, where we look not with eyes but with soul into the inheritance that lingers in us still. It is easy to speak of Cain as if he were a stranger, a figure buried in myth, or worse, a villain long gone. But there is something ancient that still walks with us, not beside us but within. The mark was placed upon his body, but it passed into our blood. We do not see it in mirrors. We feel it in silence. We hear it in the quickness of the heart when we compare, envy, or resent. The mark is not only a symbol of guilt, it is a memory, a wound etched into the soul of mankind. We inherited more than history. We inherited a bruise from the moment when the first brother raised his hand against his own. It has not faded. It surfaces in every bitterness not spoken, in every kindness withheld, in every story we tell ourselves to justify what should not be done. The mark is in our blood. Not to condemn us, but remind us how thin the line is between sorrow and sin. Cain did not wake up a murderer. He was a brother, a tiller of soil, a man who offered fruit with trembling hands. But when the fire of rejection met the breath of pride, it became rage, and rage has always been the gatekeeper of the mark. There is a lesson in that. The mark does not come because we fail. It comes when we refuse to kneel before our failure. It is not sin that makes us like Cain. It is what we do after. And so the mark lives on, not as a curse imposed from above, but as a pattern passed down through generations of human pain. It lives in empires built on bones. It lives in borders carved by blood. It lives in families split by pride, in nations drunk with wrath. But it also lives in smaller places, in silent dinners where forgiveness is never spoken, in secret jealousies no one dares name, in the whispered prayers laced with comparison. Cain is never far. Because we are never far from choosing, the mark is not destiny, it is a warning. And this is the mercy of the one who placed it. He marked Cain not to bind him, but to protect him. To let the world know, do not kill what I have already judged. Do not erase what I still see. That is the strange grace. Even when Cain's hands were stained, God still placed a hand upon his life. And that too we inherit. We inherit judgment, yes, but also restraint. A divine refusal to let vengeance write the final chapter. This is why the mark in our blood has not consumed us. It could have, but something holier than guilt sits beside it. A longing to be different, to stop the pattern, to lay down the stone, to let the blood dry without crying anew. That longing, it is also in our blood. It is the voice beneath the mark, and if we listen closely, we will hear it. It does not shout, it does not accuse, it whispers. You are not Cain. You carry him, but you are not bound to his road. You carry the bruises of history, but also the breath of the divine. You are dust, but you are remembered. You are marked, but not forsaken. This is the mystery, that the mark in our blood could become a signpost toward mercy, that what was once the symbol of cursed wandering could become a reminder to return to gentleness, return to slowness, return to the garden, not in geography but in spirit, because the garden still echoes, and the gate still waits, and the one who asked Cain, "Where is your brother?" still asks us the same, and now we know how to answer. We are our brother's keeper, we are not alone, we are not forgotten, and we are not doomed to repeat the dust. There is a better inheritance, but first we must see the mark. Only then can we choose to walk differently. Only then can we see others not as rivals, but as reflections. The mark is in our blood, but so is the breath of the one who shaped us. And his voice still calls, "Thank you." We now come to the final section of the final chapter, where the story of Cain does not end but rests. Here, the earth stops crying, not because it forgets, but because someone listens. In the beginning, the earth did not know death. It received rain, roots, and the rhythm of feet walking in the cool of the day. But then it received blood. It was not prepared for that. The soil was never meant to taste sorrow. And when Abel fell, the earth cried out, not with words but with something deeper, a moan, a trembling, a wound that pulsed beneath every harvest. The Creator heard it and he came. "Where is your brother?" Cain did not answer truthfully. And so the earth kept weeping. It has wept ever since. It wept when brother turned on brother in deserts and cities, when tribes burned homes that were not their own, when kings drew borders with iron and fire, when mothers buried children before their time. The ground has always been remembered. Long after we forget, long after we bury history with monuments and silence, the earth holds memory. Every tear not shed aloud, every name erased by power, every act that left no witness. The ground remembers, but one day it will not need to cry. That day will not come because blood stops falling. It will come because someone listens. Cain refused to hear. He walked away from the voice. He fled from the sorrow he caused. But the ones who come after him do not have to do the same. We can stop. We can turn around. We can kneel and place our hands upon the soil and say, I hear you. I know what has been done, and I will not do the same. This is the redemption not written in Cain's chapter but offered in ours. The earth does not cry for revenge. It cries for recognition, to be heard, to be seen, to be remembered rightly. And we, children of both Cain and Adam, can learn to listen, to grieve the unnamed, to protect the innocent, to let no voice go unheard simply because it speaks in pain. We can choose to write a different story upon the soil, not in blood but in seeds, not in stones but in prayers, not in walls but in wells. We can build altars again, not to offer burnt things but to offer presents, to say, I am my brother's keeper. I am the one who stayed. I am the one who heard the cry and did not walk away. This is how the curse breaks, not by force, not by forgetting, but by remembrance. The soil can be healed, but only if we treat it not as property but as a witness. It is not just ground, it is testimony. And when we walk upon it, we carry more than dust. We carry history, we carry wounds, we carry potential, and in every step we have a choice. Do we make the ground a grave or a garden? Cain made it bleed. We can make it bloom, but it begins here, with hearing the cry before it becomes a scream, with holding the sorrow before it becomes a weapon. It begins with returning to the voice that asked, Where is your brother? And answering, He is here, and I will not leave him. When we do that, when we become keepers again, the earth can rest. Its tears will not vanish, but they will no longer be wasted. They will water something new, a garden without shame, a city without fear, a brotherhood without envy. And the fire once held in Cain's hands can become light again, not to judge, but to guide, not to consume, but too warm, not to forget, but to remember in peace. Then the earth will no longer need to cry, because someone finally answered, because someone finally stayed, because someone chose to be more than just a descendant but a healer. And maybe, just maybe, God will walk with us again in the cool of the day. There is still one more brother, not the first but the last. He did not raise a stone, he raised the broken. He did not offer grain or blood, he offered himself. He did not walk eastward away from the garden. He walked downward into our dust. And though he was innocent, he bore the mark not of guilt, but of mercy. He came to find every Cain still wandering, every Abel still weeping, every soil is still stained. He did not ask, Where is your brother? He became the answer. He stood in our place. He stood in our blood. And when the ground opened again, it did not drink vengeance. It drank redemption. The earth shook, but not in rage. It trembled because a greater voice had spoken, a voice that said, This is my brother, this is my sister, and I will not let the curse speak louder than the blessing. The last brother became what the first could not a wanderer but a way, not a killer but a keeper, not a fugitive but a shepherd who gathers all who are lost. And now, as the stars breathe slow above us and the wind carries the prayers of dust, he calls. He calls to the part of you that still feels unworthy, still bears the mark, still wonders if the earth remembers your name for the wrong reason. And he says, You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are not Cain. You are not alone. You are dust but beloved. You are bruised but chosen, and you are part of a story older than murder, stronger than shame, and softer than the soil beneath your feet. So rest, child of the breath. Sleep, descendant of mercy. The earth is quiet now. The tears are heard, and the voice of God still walks wherever someone dares to become a keeper.